Pretend for the moment that there was no such thing as international law. No such thing. And pretend for the moment that even in this sense, if we're pretending in this way, that from an international standpoint or foreign policy standpoint, national laws don't even matter all that much. Now, yes, countries may take issue with a candidate receiving money from out there, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more so about the standpoint of a Game of Thrones, and a Game of Thrones from an international political order. A country, whoever's head of that country, there's something that they may want. In addition to something that they may want, there's a certain amount of capacity, powers that they have at their disposal to try to get those things. There's an amount that they're willing to expend to get those things, and there's an amount they're willing to lose to get those things, believing that whatever the thing is that they want matters more than what they're willing to expend. What they're willing to expend is not entirely just military, or even for that matter, cash. That also goes into the amount of propaganda they're willing to put out. And of course, this doesn't just go to what they're willing to get individually, it also goes to allies. Because any country that is working in, let's say, a world order or global order, are going to look for other people to assist them in the way that they propagate the world. It helps with military, it helps with intelligence, it helps with this idea of projecting propaganda, meaning if all of these countries take the same tact on a particular issue and they scream it and they say, hey, even Germany and Europe believes the same thing about this particular person. Well, yes, they're putting out propaganda because they're vassal states. Do the people in those vassal states entirely get that they're vassal states and that they're working in this kind of collective fashion? On some level they might, on some level they won't. You have a lot of people who are not necessarily engaged all that much in politics, and they just hear the EU is for, okay, and blah, blah, okay, well, that's the reality, that's the world. Missing the fact that the point is they're putting out propaganda for these guys to run and have these people in a particular mindset, especially when they want to take certain action in a foreign policy sense that they need the public to basically agree with. At the point where you've given them a line for the past X amount of time frame, when you finally decide that you're going to take some kind of action, whether it's sanctions, whether it's attacks, or whatever else, well, at that point, the public has been brought around to your point of view. So when you kill Soleimani, the public, 51% is clean kill, clean murder, good job. Despite the fact that it makes no sense, the argument that Trump gave, the fact of the matter is, it didn't even matter. The American public was on board for it. That's what the public is. All of these lefties often act like, oh, the American public is not on board for the war stuff. No. If you give a population enough propaganda, they will be on board for the war stuff. The catch here becomes how much they're willing to expend. Now, the U.S. has taken a certain tact in the Middle East where we have been gobbling up countries, putting bases and whatnot in those countries and interrogating or trying to knock down those governments. Syria was a country where the United States was not able to accomplish this. Now, part of this notion of ISIS and everything else that took over after the United States just blew Iraq to hell. Well, ISIS was backed, at the very least in a clandestine way, by one Saudi Arabia. Now, let's go back to this notion of pretend for the moment there was no international law. My contention is that there is no such thing as international law. You have a situation where stronger countries basically maintain dominance over the other countries. If a stronger country goes off and let's say kills or gets 1 million people killed from an escapade that ended up being a farcical or a lie, there's no consequence. If an African dictator kills, let's say, 1,000 people, they'll drag him in front of The Hague. This is not a situation where there's world law in regards to fairness. And after all, if there's going to be a law, there has to be some level of fairness to that. And seeing as the dominant powers are not held to account to that stuff, then you can't call it a law. You have to call it something else. My contention is that, as I said, there is no international law. When the United States wanted to invade Iraq, invaded Iraq. When it wanted to get people to come up with a reason to do it, they came up with a reason to do it and invaded. When they wanted to attack Syria and send their warplanes in to do it, they came up with a reason. Hey, they're terrorists. Again, the American public doesn't entirely pay attention to what's taking place. We've been using terrorists in these groups as battering rams, either in South America or for the most part in the Middle East. You should see some of the cables that have gone behind with Hillary Clinton and some of those emails that were sent, where they were talking about ISIL and saying, all right, we need to get the Saudis to back away from paying money to ISIL and we need to, go after the Syrian government, which is basically what Obama's strategy was. We want to go after ISIS and we want to go after Assad. It's like, what? You want to do both? And so people that we had, terrorists, backed by the military, were fighting terrorists backed by the CIA. This is nonsense that you had by instigating yourself in that. 500,000 people died in that. And the question is, why were we there? Why were we there? These geopolitical escapades. What was the United States willing to expend? Well, we weren't willing to expend a huge amount of forces like we did in Iraq. So the expense becomes somewhat minimal in regards to the way we're thinking. We're willing to expend Syrian lives. We're willing to expend, let's say, infrastructure and all of this other stuff. Because the thought is, if Syria falls and we get a government that in Syria that we like, that's a win. What we will do after the government falls is put all sorts of force and get all sorts of allies in the region to rain all sorts of hell down on the country, because at that point, everybody there will be terrorists, everybody there will be understood to be such, and we can take back the country, we'll put somebody in who we care about, etc. Even if it takes 10 years, so what? It's not the United States putting its troops in a particular country. It's basically using terrorists as a battering ram and then using other allies in the region to particularly take the country. Is that cynical? Yes. Is that what took place? Yes. Think about Libya. Is that not what is taking place right now in Libya? It was the exact same strategy that was going to be used in Syria. If it wasn't for Russia and Iran coming into play, basically stabilizing the government, that would be what would have been taking place there. Libya was not a success. Even by Obama's own standards, it was not a success. I guess the point that I'm making to you is there's nothing to stop countries from preying on other countries, especially if you're working in coordination with whatever that world order is. So in this very specific situation with somewhere like, let's say, Saudi Arabia supposedly is in secret peace talks with Iran. Why is Saudi Arabia in secret peace talks with Iran? That's the interesting question. And they're not doing it because they're looking for peace. That's the point that I'm making. A country is looking at how much do I have to expend to get what I want. Well, that's the catch. Now, if you are working with your allies, your expense may be minimum compared to whatever that thing is can compensate for. So if I have, let's say, an enemy, and all of us agree that that guy's an enemy, my expense becomes less. And the damage that I take becomes less because I'm sharing it among my allies. Even the money that I may put into this becomes, again, less. The intelligence, all of that stuff goes down. It's like you're running a company. But in this very specific case, the interest is killing, attacking, taking something else. Well, in the context of Saudi Arabia, Iran is that existential threat in the region. And these guys just kind of play for dominance. And on top of Iran being that, you have the U.S., which is in the region that is basically considers Saudi Arabia an ally, despite the fact that the United States is fighting terrorists, that Saudi Arabia is clandestinely backing. Put that to the side for the moment. Saudi Arabia looks at Iran, and what it knows is that the United States is in the region and also considers Iran an enemy, and that Israel also considers Iran an enemy. And Israel has nuclear weapons. Iran is apparently trying to get nuclear weapons. And Iran is basically left to its devices on some level. Saudi Arabia feels comfortable in this position when all of these other people are aimed at a particular enemy. What happens when the United States says, you know what, we're pulling out of Afghanistan? And not just that, Joe Biden gets in office and doesn't call this guy. Right here. Doesn't call this guy. Doesn't call that guy at all. Mohammed bin Salman doesn't talk to him. Calls his dad. He calls his dad. He says, hey, Mohammed bin Salman's dad, we need to talk about what has been taking place. You had a guy chopped up. Your kid had a guy chopped up and deboned in an embassy. That makes us look bad because we're pointing to Iran and saying these guys are bad guys. But how do we justify that? He called his dad. How emasculating is that, right? And Biden gets in office. I don't know if they talked. I would imagine they talked at this point. But understand what that looks like. Joe Biden says, I'm leaving Afghanistan. All right. If the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan, what does that mean? Well, Afghanistan and Iraq, and the justification for Syria was basically the Iraq war. Well, if Joe Biden is getting out of Afghanistan, is he also pulling out of Syria at some point? Now, his justification for Afghanistan could be really the same justification for Syria. And what does that mean for a country like Saudi Arabia? To put this in perspective, Saudi Arabia has been fighting a bloody war with Yemen. And it's not even, yeah, might as well say Yemen. The Houthis anyway. Now, Saudi Arabia, true or false? Do you believe that they would de-escalate with Iran if they thought they could get something out of it? Meaning, if they thought that they can keep the pressure up in a substantial way that would not adversely affect them, and they could get something out of this, either attacks, either, let's say, world point of view, either more sanctions or whatever they could get out of it in order to weaken what they consider to be opponent and injure the population of that country, they would probably get out of it. Do you think they would de-escalate if they didn't have to? Now, think of this from the world stage standpoint. This guy had somebody deboned in an embassy. This is not one of those, okay, let's bomb that area. We're going to give 20 people. You have 20 people as a body count. This, go kill that mofo. Chop him up with a bone saw. Cut his fingers off. This was a mob hit more than anything else. Had that done in an embassy, right? So, do you think that guy, that cuddly guy, is going to de-escalate just out of love and joy and peace? I don't think so. I don't think
سنوات
I don't think this guy de-escalates for no reason. I don't know what this tick is about. The tick is funny. But I don't think he looks at the world and says, you know what? I'm just going to, not press the advantage against my enemy at this moment. I don't think he says that.
فمثلا
What I do think is that with the U.S. pulling out of the region, he's maybe having second thoughts. And if you think about it, think about how much these guys, they've spent fighting Yemen. Obama gives the green light for them to go after Yemen. Now, keep in mind also that the United States is trying to get back to the JCPOA. So from the standpoint of an enemy, that tension on some level is going to be lessened if these guys do come to some level of agreement that come back to the JCPOA. Where does that leave Saudi Arabia? Right here, Saudi Arabia, this is weapons expenditures. This is how much the money they spend on the military. United States, China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia. $61.9 billion. All right. How many people live in Saudi Arabia? China, India, United States, Pakistan, Brazil, Russia, Japan, blah, 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 blah. Let's see, where's Saudi Arabia? I don't even see them. Oh, nope, that's not them. Where are they? Where are they? Oh, there they are. There they are. There they are. 34 million people. So let me get this straight. This country is what, 41st in population, and spending at a level that makes them what, just below Russia in regards to military expenditure. And they have been fighting a bloody campaign, bombing, torture, forced famine. We're using disease as a weapon against Yemen Houthis for all of these years that we have been told are just a band of rebels. So if you're spending just below Russia in military expenditure, $61 billion, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth highest expenditures of military, and you can't beat what is called a band of rebels. Do you really feel confident against a peer nation and what is probably more than a peer nation? It seems that they buy weapons that they don't necessarily know how to use, especially in an effective way on their own where they can actually beat a band of rebels. And this is, again, with the U.S. assistance in armaments, or at the very least in assistance in regards to fueling and whatnot. It's this part that I want to talk about beyond the talks. It's the propaganda of it all, right here, this line. Iran is a neighboring country, and we all aspire for good and special relationship with Iran. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said in a television news interview, we do not want Iran's situation to be difficult. On the contrary, we want Iran to grow and to push the region and the world towards prosperity. MBS added that Riyadh is working with regional and global partners to find solutions to Tehran's, quote, negative behavior, unquote, mentioning Tehran's nuclear program and support for the proxies around the Middle East. Quote, we hope to overcome and build a good and positive relationship with Iran that would be benefit to everyone, Prince Mohammed bin Salman said in an interview for 90 Minutes. Now, I would like to point you to WikiLeaks for the moment. Look at this line. This line is phenomenal. This is a letter that Hillary Clinton wrote John Podesta. At the same time, we should return to plans to provide the FSA, I guess that's the Free Syrian Army, basically, our terrorists, or some group moderate force, quote unquote. I love the fact they even use propaganda when they're talking to themselves. The equipment that would allow them to deal with a weakened ISIL and stepped up operations against the Syrian regime. Notice she said that in the same sentence. We need to go after ISIS and we need to go after Syria. Wait a minute. I thought Obama wasn't trying to topple the Syrian government. I thought that wasn't the case. Yes, that is exactly the case. You were lied to. The entire effort should be done with low profile, avoiding the massive traditional military operations that are at best temporary solutions. While the paramilitary operations are moving forward, the paramilitary are the terrorists that we were using as a battering ram against Assad. While the military right is moving forward, we need to use our diplomatic, more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistics support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region. Yes, Saudi Arabia is backing the terrorists. Hillary Clinton knew Saudi Arabia is backing the terrorists, didn't stop her from getting money from them. Obama knew Saudi Arabia was backing the terrorists. All of them knew that Saudi Arabia was backing the terrorists. It doesn't stop him, guy who got a guy deboned in the embassy, from sitting here and blabbering about Iran and their proxies. Iran and their proxies. These guys are backing terrorists, head choppers, rapists. That's what this guy was backing. And the United States knew it. And still act like this guy was a friend of ours. Fact of the matter is, his concern is that the U.S. is changing focus from the Middle East to what seems to be a pivot towards China. If you can't beat the Houthis, how are you standing toe-to-toe with Iran? And for whatever the bravado that he may have within the context of his own country, I suppose he's not insane and realizes where he stands in this. This position that he's taking here for these secret talks are not because, the guy that was willing to kill and starve and use disease to go after all of these Yemenis and whatnot. No, that guy is not doing this for peaceful reasons. That guy is doing this because he recognizes a sense of weakness now that the United States has started to shift its focus from out of the Middle East. One of his partners is exiting the stage, and he is checking his expenditures and is thinking to himself, all right, let's level this off. Let's level this off. I have no idea the conversations that have taken place between the United States and Saudi Arabia. But what I strongly suggest is that the U.S., I think Biden is pulling out of that war, trying to, or at the very least giving verbal support to it. Whether he does it, who knows? It seems like he is legitimately pulling out of Afghanistan. What that means for Syria, I don't necessarily know. He may continue to use proxies in Syria as opposed to pulling out troops. Who knows? But if he's pulling out of Afghanistan, it very well may be pulling out of the region. And hell, he may even know, based on communications that he's had with Washington, that may be what Biden is thinking. I think what he's thinking is the United States is not going to back us on a lot of the stuff. They're not going to continue to put pressure on Iran, especially if they sign the JCPOA. Maybe we need to bring down hostility in this relationship. All of this is brought about because at this point, he recognizes can't get out of it what he would have gotten out of it if we had a bunch of friends there putting pressure on Iran. I love this. This is actually fascinating to me because This is if you had somebody who could take whatever he wanted, for example. And then it becomes, okay, well, I can't take anything that I want. Yes, I can kill that dog, but that dog is going to bite the shit out of me and I don't want to be bitten. So there's only so far I'm willing to go in dealing with that. Okay, well, let's bring it up a little bit. Let's say you're dealing with a person, and not just a person, a state and a country. And let's say with that, you think to yourself, what can I take out of this? What can I get out of this? Well, what happens when your ability to get out of this gets less and less and less? And you recognize, all right, let's make a deal. And that deal, now the catch becomes, if the U.S. becomes more instantiated in the Middle East, will this also become that deal unraveling? Yeah, I suspect he's going to play this from an international standpoint of, I'm going to always play for whatever I can get out of this contest. And if I get an advantage, I'm going to press it. If I lose that advantage, I'm going to back away from it and try to level off. I think that's the way international politics works. And I think that's what MBS is doing right here. The point that I'm making here is it is out of weakness, not out of some level of thought of strength. Like, share, subscribe.